Foundation. We're here for a fireside chat with Erin Lowry, host of our Money Matters series, along with special guest Berna Anat, whose book Money Out Loud just was published last month. By my count, this is the 17th webinar in the Money Matters series. Thank you for being here again, Erin. I think you've even done other webinars beyond those with us. Erin's covered a variety of financial topics specific to authors, everything from negotiating rates as a freelancer to estate planning for literary estate, marketing, and also all sorts of money related stuff. So please check those out in the resource library on our website or on our YouTube channel. You don't have to be a member of the Authors Guild to watch recordings of programs put on by the Authors Guild Foundation. So I'm really glad we're doing this today. We always have unanswered questions. Not all questions fit neatly into one bucket like a webinar topic, but there's still great information to share. We're very lucky to have these two knowledgeable and empathic authors and finance experts here today. Thanks for the pre-submitted questions. We have the Q&A box open here in chat in Zoom, and there's also the chat box. Berna has welcomed you to tell us where you're from, what kind of books you write, and that sort of thing. Let's have fun today, and we're excited to answer your questions. Erin, I'll turn it to you.
Thanks, Johnny. Hi, everyone. Wonderful to be back. And hi to anyone who has joined a Money Matters webinar before. We're doing things a little bit differently this time. And instead of having it be, feel a little more formal, we're going to go fireside chat style. So I've got some questions for Berna. I will also be actively participating and answering. And for those of you who don't know me, Erin Lowry, author of the 4-part Broke Millennial series. Most recently, here's the plug coming in, Broke Millennial Workbook. Take control and get your financial life together. And with me today, I know we asked people for genre. I did see one, financial therapy, a fellow personal finance writer, because we are talking about money. So Berna, explain who you are.
Yeah, sorry, I'm losing it a teeny tiny bit because I immediately recognize Asia Evans, who's a financial therapist who I've worked with. I'm like, what's up? Hi, everyone. My name is Berna Anat. I am a financial educator and hype woman, which I believe I'll be explaining in a little bit of what that even is. I did make that up. Speaking of genre, I wish I was in. That's pretty much what I wish I was, or might be. I am an author of Money Out Loud. The sun is currently playing me back here, so there's my book. It is a financial education book, all the financial stuff no one taught us. It's technically coded as a young adult book, but it's really all the stuff that I wish someone had told me anytime between the ages of like 16 to now. I make educational fun, maybe like edutainment sort of financial videos, podcasty things, speaker, all the stuff. And I'm a major Broke Millennial fan, just fangirl from the beginning.
Well, I'm so excited that we're collaborating again. We actually have collaborated before when I went on book tour for my second book. And, it's been an interesting journey for me in terms of what to call myself, because generally the media likes to use the term personal finance expert, which especially in the beginning of when I was writing about personal finance, like, what does that mean? Like, there's not really a credential for personal finance experts. So I started to use the term financial translator, because to me, that felt like the most accurate description of what I was doing. I was taking kind of my journalism background, going out interviewing really smart, very experienced people, taking that jargon, distilling it into something that was relatable for my average reader, usually a millennial. Now, when you came out with the term financial hype woman, I was like, oh man, that's amazing. And I would like for you to describe kind of the genesis of the term. And also, I have an idea in my head of what that means, but what do you want people to understand it to mean?
Yes, love that question. First, I'm realizing, and I knew your background, but every time you tell it, I'm like, oh, same. Also from like a communications journalism background, constantly carrying around that like little bit of imposter syndrome of just like, I am not a CFP finance person with background of all the money stuff. I am first and foremost like first gen daughter of immigrants from the Philippines. No one in my family knew money and finance and all those things. So like you, when I started sort of like combing my own way through my own financial journey, trying to get debt free, build up my first emergency savings, get out of debt and all that stuff, I saw lots of financial educators, authors, creators. I think what I didn't see enough of was just, whenever I describe this, I have more noises than words, to be honest. I feel like I didn't see enough like, come on. Like I need more excitement. I need more humor. I need to be entertained a little bit. A lot of what I do in my book, in podcasts before, in my content, I'm essentially speaking to like my inner child, because I'm very, if you can't tell, in touch with my inner child. And I need to be entertained. Another thing I found, which I'm sure you've also found, Erin, in the financial education space, it's like, the way I like to say it is the financial education space oftentimes is hella male, hella pale, hella stale. I am from the Bay Area. There's hella all up in this book. If you don't like that, you're going to hate this. And it's not that the financial educators before us are giving horrible advice most of the time. Well, sometimes it's horrible advice, but a lot of it is sound. It was so boring. And so like using wild finance ease terms when it could be explained so much more simply, which I admire so much of what you did for me, Erin, in like my early years of financial education. And so Hype Woman just came, I think, because I was a cheerleader in high school, which should surprise nobody. And that's when I found that I'm just really good at getting excited for people and people getting excited about things. And excitement is not a thing you find a lot in the financial education space, even though financial like freedom or financial lessons frees up so much room for, like, there could be a lot of joy to be found. I just felt like the financial world needed more hype. A little background: a hype woman basically is, let's say, like, especially in the like 80s and 90s, going into the 2000s, you see like a rapper performer on stage, they're doing their thing, they're in the front, and then there's always the person off to the side, like, yeah, Erin, yeah, Broke Millennial, like making sure that the energy is up with the crowd, making sure the sort of main character of the stage feels like their energy is up too. So that's what I hope to do in the financial world. Just hype myself up, hype other people for their journeys.
So 50th anniversary of hip hop this year. Bunch of fun stuff coming out about that. Total tangent, but there's a lot of really interesting information out there about that.
That's very true. I am but tangent is I am like 0.5% like related to the origins of hip hop. But I have, of course, it must be shouted out that like the origin in my mind of the hype woman is from like hip hop culture and like rap and hip hop culture. And so again, it's like tying worlds together where they weren't typically associated.
Which I think is a masterful, like, you do such a masterful job of that and making something relatable and accessible. Particularly, I remember when I started, which is a little over 10 years ago, and the space has really exploded in the last decade. But when I started, it was mostly men still, and mostly married men, not living in an urban environment. So to me, being at the time a single woman living in New York City was still such a different voice. And now, but still white, still looked like the archetype of a lot of people who traditionally gave personal finance advice. And so now the whole genre has really exploded, and we've democratized the way people get access to advice. Now, that comes with its own struggles to a degree, in terms of there's some great advice and there's some really bad advice out there too. And that could be a whole different webinar about how to protect yourself when following personal finance educators, influencers, what have you. But before we dig into all of that, your genesis was not the book. You really predated the book with all of your other work, but your first book came out just a couple months ago. And congratulations. I know it is so much work, but I'm so curious. Finances of publishing. What really surprised you along the way when it came to not only just how publishing is handled, but specifically the finances around you as an author?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I'm just fresh off of the book launch era. I feel like I'm still like lifting my head from the dust. What happened? Where am I? So first thing that comes to mind is the finances of launching one's book. I, of course, like many authors, many first-time authors, believed from the outside of the publishing world that once you get the book deal, it's just, and just like, you're now handed off into stardom. No, I think lots of authors here can be like, I did not understand that when it came to specifically book launch time, when it came to ramping up the excitement around your own book, when it came to touring, launch event, launch parties, travel, all that, like setting up the venue, snacks on your launch day, that is almost entirely out of the author's pocket a lot of the time. I signed with HarperCollins. I was like, oh, good. Heck yeah, they're going to be writing checks for me all day. No. It was maybe like a year before the launch process that I was like, so gang, what are our plans? And essentially they were like, well, what are your plans? And I was like, what? I learned basically that even with a large publisher, it's like they're like, well, what do you want to do? And then we'll maybe help. So I had to come out of pocket for a lot of those things. We pay a lot of the time for our own book tours, a lot of the times for our own launch parties. My publisher was able to like kick in for some things and like cover my travel for some things, but not all things. And even the things that they covered, my agent on the side were like, it's kind of amazing that they're even offering anything, because a lot of the times they offer nothing. So I feel like I kind of had to like shake it a little bit before the launch even came out to prove that like, oh, this book might be a viable thing for you to get behind. Like almost have to prove that I as an entity, I'm a good investment for a launch, as if writing a whole entire book was not enough of like an emotional and financial investment for myself. So if I could go back a year or 2 years, I would have started saving for my own book launch, because now, and Erin and I were discussing this a little bit before the call, I am in a, the phrase like F around and find out, just like you mess around and then you feel the consequences later. Yes. Book launch, I was like, let's go. I'm going to, you only launch once. Like I'm going to throw as much money at it as I can. And now I'm in like a recouping period. I've been deeply humbled by the amount of money that I spent around my launch. Now, obviously not everybody spends this way or like plans their launch like this. I had a lot of author friends being like, Berna, you did the work already. You wrote the book. If you did nothing, if you had one virtual party on Zoom, that would be enough. That is not the way that I had wanted my launch. And so it's not how I approached it. But man, that was expensive, Erin.
Yeah. I mean, I've been there. The first one, I did a modest launch party in New York City. And then for the second one, I decided to mount my own tour. And the thing that I did that's a little different than the norm is I actually, because, I've been working in the personal finance kind of influencer space for a long time. I had a lot of connections to companies. So I went and had them sponsored as much as I could. So I tried to get sponsorship deals in different cities to kind of mount that way, but I did not walk away with a profit. I paid the people on panels. It was ticketed events. So people paid to come, but then they got a swag bag. They got a copy of the book. There was food and drink at all of the venues. Like it was a full scale production. And the other thing that people, I don't think always recognize outside of authordom is you're out there promoting your book. It's very hard to also be working to earn a living at the same time. So not only are you potentially hemorrhaging money on these events, you're also maybe not bringing in much money. And if you do, because, hey, the book sold well and now you're in royalties, you're still not seeing that for months and months and months and months and months down the road. So trying to figure out how to balance all of that. One advice that I usually give first-time authors is if you do want to do a promotion, if you do want to host your own events, put aside at least 50% of your advance. But that's in a reality in which you can also be writing that book and working a job and earning an income, and your advance is not having to subsidize your life. So there's no simple, easy answer to all of that. But, if you still got the day job and you can put aside part of the advance, it's definitely a piece of the option. Yeah. Now, we had a lot of pre-submitted questions around scarcity and abundance mentality and also financial trauma. So we're going to dig into that a little bit right now. Also, a reminder to everyone, those folks who did pre-submit, I have a lot of those questions. If you have questions along the way or want something clarified, please drop it into the Q&A. We'll be checking that out. I'm going to switch us to a fairly heavy topic, and that is financial trauma. I think first, it's really important to define what is financial trauma, and then why does it matter to tackle it as an adult? Why can't we just shove it into a box and put it in the back of our brain and just be like, okay, you're back there now with other bad things that have happened, financial trauma, you've been compartmentalized.
Yes. I'm so glad we're talking about this. And again, I feel Asia Evans here in the room with us today, who is a financial therapist. So Asia, if we mess up the definition of this, please feel free to jump in the chat and be like, stop it. I know exactly what's happening. Financial trauma is essentially, and this is as explained to me by Shani Tran, who is a licensed mental health therapist, who I quote in the very first chapter of my book, where it's entirely about financial trauma. Essentially, this is me defining it for my inner child. It's things happen to you financially, like in your money world when you were younger or throughout your life, and that affects the way you manage and think about money now. It's like any other type of trauma where you might have experienced something kind of massive, or like quietly, or massive or massively. You experience an event that kind of tweaks your mindset around something, and then if you don't unpack the effects of that event, you basically carry on the effects to your habits today. And it's always incredible. I think I love to dive into this because it's something that people don't talk about very much. When it comes to financial education, they come to people like me and you, and they're just like, now tell me the tips and tell me the tricks. And we can give you the tips and tricks, but like the fact of the matter is, money is incredibly emotional. It's incredibly personal. It's so tied into, because money is like the language of survival under capitalism. It's tied into like our bones and our DNA emotionally. Like it's tied into how we feel around scarcity and worth. There's shame. There's like just living with lack. And so again, when you are like kind of layering on financial education and like budgeting tips and tricks, sometimes those things fall through because of life, because of our habits or whatever. I think that the issue with not unpacking one's financial trauma is ultimately a lot of us end up blaming ourselves for financial issues that don't necessarily have to do with us. We blame ourselves for being in debt entirely. We blame ourselves for not being able to like put food on the table or make paychecks meet. And there's a lot of interesting things one can unpack through financial trauma. To give an example, I work a lot with first, second gen child of immigrant millennial audience. And I'm not like a licensed therapist or a licensed mental health person, but I learn a lot about our like collective financial traumas through talking with my audience. And thank you, Asia. That really affirms me that I nailed it. And some of the financial traumas I see that come up in my community are scarcity mentality. The idea that we were, that we either are the generation or were raised by the generation that never had enough, that came from way, way less means than we did everything they could to piece together a life so that we can thrive, the next generation. But just because now we might be in a place of greater abundance, maybe we're in a more stable place, that scarcity mentality has never gone away. We are still wildly frugal, or in reaction to frugality, we are overspending, or like we get a paycheck and we never feel like it's enough, or we spend the entire thing. We just like react in completely adverse ways. And again, it's important to unpack those things, especially if we want to change our financial habits in the future. It's like, you got to know where you came from in order to make a map for where you're going.
Yes. It's such a good explainer. And, it's the scarcity we're going to get into a little bit in the next question, but I do feel what's also two things that are important to recognize as well. One, it doesn't have to be like a major cataclysmic event that happened in your family that created it. It can be a slow drip of things that happen over time. Sometimes we think about 2008 crisis, how old were you? What happened to your parents? Maybe a job loss then triggered losing of the house, which then triggered some level of instability. Like those are big, heavy level things that can happen. But it can also just be your parents or guardian or whomever raised you constantly making comments about money, constantly making comments about there not being enough, making that a stressor, saying things to you like, oh, we can't afford that. That's a waste of money. Don't talk about XYZ. It's rude. Like we're getting all of this messaging along the way too. So I think that's the other thing to be considering is you might be confused about the fact that if you grew up in an environment that financially felt stable in terms of bills were always paid, maybe there wasn't a whole lot of discussion about money, but somehow you also feel like there's never enough and you're still really frugal, you might still have scarcity mentality for other reasons. And that's an important thing to realize and recognize about yourself. The other part, a woman that I know in our space made a comment to me once that I always found fascinating. And it's that she grew up in financial chaos. So she grew up in a household that was very boom or bust. It was either we have a bunch of money or my parents have spent all of our money and now we're really stressed. So roller coaster ride of emotion for her. But that chaos for her is familiar. So that when she, as an adult in her 40s now, reaches a level of financial stability, she blows it up for herself. Like consistently, this pattern repeats. She will reach a level of financial stability, be there for a couple of months, and then do something, whether it's make a huge purchase, quit a job, make a big life change. She does something that then pushes her back into financial chaos. And she does that because at default, financial chaos is her comfort zone, which might sound absolutely wild to people. But our brains aren't rational when it comes to a lot of things, including money. So I love the point in the beginning that so much of money is about emotions, and so much of the work that we're doing is really more of the psychology around money and less so about like 2 + 2 is 4. Like, yes, that is actually factually accurate. I guess I don't know about Common Core math. That's confusing, but just joking. But there are things that economists are like, it's rational. Things are rational. We're like, sure, things might be rational, but humans are not.
Exactly.
And so that's why I do want to get into a great question that got submitted is, how do we deprogram stressors around a scarcity mindset? What can we do to try to switch our mentality? And I'm recognizing before we get too far into that, let's define scarcity and abundance mentality. Do you want to take a run at that first? When we say scarcity mindset, what do we mean? And we say abundance mindset, what do we mean?
Goodness. I'm like, oh, I can definitely define scarcity mindset. That is the chaos in which I grew up. It's so funny as you're describing this, like this chaos story. It's because you can replace financial chaos with like emotional chaos, relationship chaos. Low key, I'm like, I have like in the love and relationship space, I've dated people where I'm like, you are used to chaos with your mother. You know what I mean? Like it's so copy paste in such an interesting way. But we think about like relational chaos and we don't think about financial chaos. It's just so funny to me that I'm like, oh, why aren't we talking like financial trauma fits right into the same hallway as like how we are affected as humans. And yet we think of these things as separate. I can definitely speak to scarcity mentality. Basically the idea, at least the way that scarcity mentality might affect you, again, coming from the first gen place, I was raised by immigrants from the Philippines. It was very much like the low middle income household. And we were always operating off of like factually, there's not ever really enough. It was very paycheck to paycheck. Everything you were saying, Erin, about there's not enough money, we can't do that. That's crazy. Like it just raised around this mentality of there's just never enough. And so every dollar you have to scrape for, you have to save. Even when you get an abundance, even when you get a big paycheck or something, you're still inside of that mentality of like, well, we need to squirrel it away. We need to be afraid for the future. It's like a very fear-driven type of mentality. Part of scarcity mentality as well is just, again, even if your financial situation changes, your structure, what you know is fear. What you know is keep it as close as possible. Interestingly, some folks might like embody scarcity mentality because it was what they were taught or what they were sort of like raised and like baked inside of. And because of that, like run to the other side of the spectrum. And it's not necessarily abundance mentality. It's like F it mentality. You know what I mean? It's like we can react to scarcity mentality in a lot of different ways, extreme frugality or like extreme chaos. Either way, it's pushing you to extremes. And in my mind, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm like, what even is abundance mentality? Well, who is she over there? But in my mind, what I understand is sort of the messaging of abundance mentality is there is always enough, or enough will come, or I trust in that there being enough. Whereas the messaging of scarcity mentality is there's never going to be enough, even if you physically show to my face that there is enough. It's like a set of blinders, if that makes sense. And maybe you could speak to abundance mentality better, because when I think about it, I also think of like, here's how to life hack your brain into manifesting. And I'm like,
yeah, I think where it can get a little tricky with talking about abundance is that you can get very like manifesty secrety, where that's more of like, let's wish that something can happen and it will, as opposed to like, let's set a goal and pair that with action and therefore make something come to fruition. don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but I agree with everything you were just saying, especially about scarcity can manifest into very different ways in an adult person, either like hyper frugality or hyper spender, or sometimes both. You might be one way for a season and then another way for a different season. One of the things that I consider with abundance, agreed that part of it is you just believing that I have always earned this amount, like looking back at the factual accuracy of your adult life. I have been able to pay my bills. I have been able to do this. I will be able to continue to do this. Mm-hmm. But the other part is the concept that with scarcity, it's like we're all fighting for limited resources, where with abundance, there is enough to go around for everyone. I am not competing directly with this person for this resource. We can all have enough to have a fulfilling life. And that is where I think it can be really helpful to try to switch your mentality, particularly if you're self-employed and you get very precious about sharing information perhaps with other people, like how much you're getting paid, what you charge for things. Let's talk about advances real quick. Actually, I'm not putting you on the spot to share your number, but somebody did come in with a question about secrecy and money, and also transparency. Author costs of book tours, typical advances for non-celeb, not influencer, first-time authors may expect. So I'll go on record, first of all, saying when I got my first book deal was back in 2016. I was not an influencer, quote unquote, in like the modern use of the word. I was not a well-known entity. I did not even have Instagram yet. So I was not getting paid like a quote unquote, like niche celeb and or influencer. I got $20,000 for my first book advance. The thing I will always say as a positive of a modest advance is it's much easier to out earn and get into royalties, and therefore easier to get future deals, usually. My second book deal, I did a twofer deal. So I got books 2 and 3 were combined for a $75,000 advance for 2 books. So $37,500 when you break it down like that. And for my book tour for my second book, I used a lot of part of my advance chunk for the second book, as well as trying to get sponsorship deals. I would say all in between doing a 9-city tour, I want to say I probably spent like $30,000 all the way around. And you also include in expenses and all of that. I'd have to go back and check the record. But I can say for my first book tour, I knew somebody who had a space. It was ultimately an office space. So, barter situation, used her office space. I hired a couple of like basically TaskRabbit style bartenders to also serve food, went to Costco to buy alcohol, bought some like cupcakes and a cake and some like heavy hors d'oeuvres type stuff, streamers, like, just kind of DIY'd, hacked that. And I think I maybe spent like $2,500 on my first event in New York City. So those are some of my numbers. And I feel like too, sometimes we think that folks who, get well into the 6-figure deals, like that's the better version of things. And it kind of depends on what your goal is as an author. Financially as a windfall, great. But if your goal as an author is to keep writing books, if that is your dream, well, do you think confidently that you're going to earn out a 6-figure advance? Because if you're not, it might be harder to get another book deal. So that's the other nuance here that I think is very important. Share what you do or don't want to share is totally fine.
Oh my gosh. No, we're big fans of financial transparency here. And again, I'm like the dust is settling just from my book launch, where I'm like, what have I done like line by line financially to myself? I wish I had heard the advice of save at least half of your advance for the launch, because that is the most expensive thing I've ever done my entire career. So when I got my book deal, I thought as well, I'm just like, what will my goal be? Because actually you and I spoke, you were so generous and you were like, let's sit down and like, come lamb, let me hold you to my bosom and speak truth into you about how the publishing industry actually works. I ended up getting $75K for this first book. And it was one of those things where you had given me the advice of like, a modest advance means that you were like exactly what you just said, you'll earn out faster, you'll get like a further book deal. I was like, I don't know. I am not positive as to whether I want to write books for a living. But I do know, the way that I sort of came upon the book deal, like you said before, I'd been doing so many other things that then led up to the book deal. I was doing video, I was doing podcasting, I was doing speaking. And so I saw the book deal as like, this is going to be part of the like, hey, Berna financial education umbrella, but I don't see myself becoming like a writer for life. So I was like, this is clearly how I approach it financially. YOLO. Like, it's going to be my one book deal. It's a one time I'm going to be launching a book. It's kind of a thought and like financial and creative experiment for me. And so I think part of the 75K that, again, I did not negotiate on my own. Thank all glory be to my agent, who was like, I know how it goes. I've negotiated with HarperCollins before. The 75K, I'm sure, had a lot to do with the fact that I had an internet following already at the time. And then the way that I'm financing my launch is exactly the same. I finance my launch is exactly the same mindset of just like, I don't think I'm ever going to be launching a book again. I think a lot of authors can tell you that this in and of itself could be labeled a traumatic experience, though it was a lot of fun as well. I would say all in, I did most of my spending around my launch starting from like September, October of last year to like May of this year. Total with like, for me, it was, I did a launch event in New York, and then I did a launch event in LA, and I did a launch event in SF, because that is where my physical communities like were strongest. And I wanted to just party and hang out with my communities. All in probably costs around like 28K. I also stressed, though, it wasn't necessarily the parties that cost the most money for me. It was the investment that I did in the marketing leading up to it. So I paid a community sort of like email manager to help me with my like email funnels. I paid my video editor extra to like ramp up video series up until the book. I finally took on a social media manager and like contracted helper to be my social media eyes and ears during the launch and do all my reposting and cover my events in terms of social media. So I invested a lot in like people to help me launch the thing as opposed to the events itself. I don't regret a dollar or dime spent, but it did hurt. I will say that.
Yeah, two things can be true, you know? Yes. That is the reality of all of that.
Same.
I know quite a few questions are coming in about launches. If we have time at the end, we'll circle back. I want to make sure we don't go too far afield of the point of making it a money-centric webinar. And, you know, thinking about windfalls, which a lot of times advances feel like that, you know, it kind of ties a little bit into that dreaded B word, budget. And it behooves us to talk a little bit about how, particularly, we're both self-employed, we both earn variable, sometimes volatile incomes. How do you handle your money month to month? How do you budget? What is your favorite advice to give either a hopeful self-employed person or somebody who is actively self-employed and earning variable income, maybe works on commission or just works on something that's variable? How do you handle it? So much advice is written for the paycheck person.
It's so amazing that you're asking me this, because again, I was effing around for the first 6 months of my life, and in a way that was like so different from my business usually. And now I am finding out. And so I am in a very financial humbled place at the moment. And just last week kind of went through this big review of my finances, my cash flow from the first half of the year into the second. And we were just talking about this before the call, where I'm like, oh, not only did I need to like chill out with the way that I spent money in this special form of my life, like I need to get back to what my regular spending used to be, but I'm also thinking about like adjusting my own paycheck, like what I spend, just adjusting everything, just like a spring cleaning of my financial life. And the one thing that's on my mind now, again, from this very humbled, like conservative, like I hope you had fun in H1 because in H2 you are sitting down type of place. The word that keeps like circulating in my mind is runway. The thing that makes me feel the most secure as a self-employed person, I've now been self-employed for about 6 years, 5-6 years, is knowing by the numbers how much I can run how many more months I can run my business if I don't earn a single dollar. Again, a financial therapist such as Asia Evans in the crowd might be like, it's your scarcity mentality, girl. It's your scarcity mentality popping out. But this is why I'm not a business finance advice person, but I am telling you what's going on in my business right now. I need a certain amount of runway, like 6 months runway. I need to see that in my bank accounts in like different areas in order to feel secure. It's kind of like building an emergency savings. Like in my personal life, I felt chaotic and a little like kind of YOLO. Basically, the first six months of this year could represent my 20s, where I was just like, I'm spending, I'm scared, but I'm spending. And then finally, when I got that emergency savings of like, oh, that's what it is to build 6 months of runway in my personal life, or 3 to 4 months of runway in personal life. Now I can make more kind of grounded financial decisions. I have to apply that same principle to my business life. I need like 4 to 6 months of runway of like, if I don't earn another dollar, I can keep the lights on, I can pay for all my things, I can still pay myself my salary. I need that amount. And then in order to budget that amount, I need to understand what it costs to run my business from month to month, and then times that by 4 or times that by 6. That is like the most basic. And one of the reasons I'm like talking this out is because this is me talking to me in a mirror of being like, Berna, did you forget that you need this many months of runway? Did you lose your mind in the first half of the year? But that's the one thing that I hold to very, very tightly. Because from there, like in your financial life, you cover your bases, you like let that, like, it's almost like feeding your scarcity mentality. Look, there's enough. Look at it. Calm down. Now you can make decisions that have more to do with creativity or joy or like progress or productivity, as opposed to like, oh God, deep fear, which is where you can come from when you don't have runway.
Could not agree more, which also speaks to my scarcity mentality. And we can continue to talk about ways in which we try to deprogram ourselves, suggestions we have for other people. I too very much have a scarcity mentality around what feels like boom and bust cycles of being self-employed and being an author. And I do want to actually do a nod to a comment that keeps coming up in the chat, this idea of using a book for your business as opposed to just like trying to sell books to make a living. I don't want to diminish that we should be able to earn a living of being an author. Like historically, people did earn a living that way, and also wonderful if you can. There are certain genres for which that seems slightly easier than others, but for both of us, our books did completely open doors to be able to do our jobs on a bigger scale. It was a credential, a feather in the cap, whatever kind of cliche you want to use. And that has been huge, I think, professionally for both of us. But I'm with you on 6 months is actually also my magic number of what has to be in my business account. And I do want to, on a more like nitty gritty level, I will share what I like to do. And I now have my company set up as an S corporation, which there's a webinar, LLC or S Corp, that you can access on the Money Matters webinar tab. So you can go learn more about that. I'm not diving into that right now, but that forced me to be in a scenario where I'm on payroll. So my company that I own pays me, the employee that I am, which stabilizes your budget on a particular kind of way, makes you a paycheck employee. But prior to even doing that, that's how I set my life up. So for the 6 years of self-employment prior to becoming an S corporation, I had a business bank account. Every penny I made professionally went into that banking account, including royalties and advances. And then I just would pay myself a salary. And by that, I mean, I knew, hey, month to month, I think when I started out, I was maybe paying myself $4,000 a month. I was like, this to pay rent, live a decent life that I want to live, feels like something I can afford to do. I'm going to pay myself $4,000 a month. That's going to move from my business account to my personal account once a month, like I was paying myself. The other thing I did, I moved every time I got paid before I became an S corporation. Every time I got paid, 40% of a paycheck would go into a savings account that was separate from my business account called Uncle Sam's Money.
Oh my God.
I named that. It was specifically for paying my taxes, my LLC fee, and then anything that remained at the end of the year also went into my retirement account. And then I also put money aside along the year for my retirement account. Please do not forget to set money aside to pay yourself, to pay your quarterly estimated taxes and your annual taxes.
Yes. It hurts my feelings whenever I look at it. Sometimes I look at my business accounts and I wish I could like blur out the numbers, because I don't want to physically look at my business tax savings account because it hurts my feelings so bad. But I do everything you're describing, double click.
And I also just want to make one more note. I saw somebody pop up, writers are making $4,000 a month, exclamation point. And I think it's important to share numbers because being an author, advances in royalties is one of the several ways that I earn money. I also do speaking engagements. I also do all sorts of writing for all sorts of different outlets. I have gone in and out of doing kind of the influencer kind of things and brand partnerships. I've done corporate consulting. Like there are so many ways and streams of income that I'm using. So please don't think that that number is exclusively tied to advances and royalties, because it is not.
Same, 100%. I have to say, again, I sort of like backed into becoming a writer and always planned for a book to be one of the sort of streams or like parts of the greater umbrella of the work that I do, which is, again, I think where some people might be like, ugh, millennial influencer. But the reason we are the way we are is because we don't get to 4K plus a month just off of one, or you could get it off of one stream, but same with you. I'm doing speaking. I'm big on brand partnerships and like video production. If you create a podcast, you can get like ad revenue from that, using the book as leverage to like amp up all the other channels. So I mean, it could be its own like webinar of just like how influencers make money. But yeah, my 4K plus is definitely not, it's not coming from writing, but it's helping. That's the hope.
Honestly, if you can, that is amazing. That is wildly impressive. So one question that we were talking about ahead of time that had come in that I find really interesting. I'm going to read the question as it came in, but I want to sort of modify it for the general discussion. And the question was, what do you consider a sustainable annual income for a region in the United States where cheap homes cost around $400,000? Mm-hmm. Now, I want to expand this out because notably, I live in New York City. Berna lives in the Bay Area. So we live in two of the most expensive markets in our country.
We do.
But more importantly, I think what's the interesting question here is like, what is a reasonable / sustainable annual income? And that is a really important number for particularly self-employed people to identify. So I'm curious for you, Berna, how do you identify what is, and pardon the scarcity mentality perhaps of saying it this way, bare minimum number that you need?
What is the enough? 100%. It's funny because when I first started becoming self-employed, my goal was basically to make the amount that would replace what I was making before I quit from my full-time job before. I was working in tech before, and I wasn't like 300K. I was like associate level in tech, but I was like, man, if I can earn anywhere between my like initial salary in tech, which in of itself was already like between like 90 to 110K. I'm like, if I can get there one day, that would be so sick. Though I do also know that like as a self-employed person, I was like, all right, I'm not going to get there anytime soon. So what then is my, as Tiffany Aliche, another fave financial creator would call it, what is my noodle budget, right? Like that was my goal. But starting off as a self-employed person, I needed to understand my noodle budget. Noodle budget meaning if you're only eating ramen noodles, if it's like, what is your absolute bare survival number? And that took actually a couple months of like looking at my life and being like, well, what is it even? Before that, flying by the seat of my pants. Again, my 20s, chaos. But if I had to stop, and we're kind of using that magical word that people love to hate, budgeting, it's essentially kind of surveying your life and understanding what's the number I need to survive? What are the bills that I must pay from month to month in order to keep the lights on? What is essential for my survival? And so it's like utilities, rent, medicine, health and safety, anything related to that. What's the typical amount that I pay for in groceries? Let me not lie to myself in terms of like, what do I pay to entertain myself throughout the month? I think a lot of the times we'll be like, the noodle budget is, I only spend $200 a month when I hang out with my friends. No, you don't. Stop lying. No, you don't. I think it's important when you're building out this noodle budget to like be a little conservative, but like, you don't have to hurt yourself. Like that's where we run into issues where we're like, why did I do this to myself? To basically measuring out what it costs your life at the very basis of it from month to month. And that then sort of, if you want to sort of draw up like a rough salary, multiplying that by 6 months or a year. And then for me, it was a matter of like trial and error. Like, I'm like, okay, I think this is like you said, the 3 to 4K was exactly where I started off too. It was like $3,500. I think that's what I need from month to month. I'm living with roommates. I'm in the Bay Area. I am like pretty frugal. Let's try that out. Pay myself that for a month. Ouch. Here are the reasons that I went wrong with that budget. Here's what I need to adjust. I adjust it again. I pay myself a different paycheck. And so it's just sort of like, it's very, very trial by error. And it's still to this day, trial by error, to be honest. The errors now happen for me in terms of like halves as opposed to month. I'll look at an entire half of the year and be like, okay, historically, I was paying myself this much because the last 5 years of my business informed me this much. Now I must change it. I am literally in the 2 weeks where I'm like, and now you must change your habits, Berna, for the next 4 or 5 months of the year. But that's sort of how I crawled to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, mine was very similar. It was starting with figuring out how much do I need to pay. I call it the bare essential budget, which
Yes.
by the way, should also be the baseline of your emergency savings fund. Because when people say you need like 3 to 6 months of, money in order to build a healthy emergency savings, to me in the bare essential, you're stripping away any of the fun stuff, but like truly what do you need just to keep the lights on, like bare minimum for everything that keeps your life going, including debt payments. Keep those in mind. Don't want to go into forbearance or default during this time. So I started with figuring out what did I need bare minimum. And then on top of that, I was like, now I have to also set aside money for taxes and whatnot. So let's say that I started with the 4K number. I was like, all right, well, if I really need to be netting $4,000, I need to be earning about $7,500 per month. Let's times that by 12. This is how much I need in a year.
Yes.
And that's how I started with setting like, this is my annual goal. And then anytime I got like a big contract or had a big windfall month, I'd be like, okay, great. So now the amount that I need for the rest of the year, like, hey, maybe it's March and I've already earned 60K, but maybe I'm about to go into a season where I'm about to earn like $4,000 over 2 months.
Yes.
But I'm already X amount towards my goal. That's how I started to, honestly, I still run a lot of drills like that. I also am a lover of hypothetical budgets, which might sound wild to me. But I have something the first one I created was right in the early pandemic. My business was bottoming out because speaking engagements are a large part of how I make money. And all of a sudden the world has shut down and we haven't figured out the Zoom thing yet. And also businesses were, canceling contracts left, right, and center because they were trying to figure out their own budget. So I created what I called the doomsday budget, which is what is the bare minimum my household needs to survive? And it's bare essential is the same thing. It just sounds better than doomsday budget. And so creating that honestly gave me a feeling of control that like, okay, if we need to switch over to this at any given moment because things feel like they're bottoming out, I felt in control. I create what if budgets for scenarios in case they happen. So great example. I am a self-employed person who does not have benefits from a company. So if I decide to have a biological child and need to like physically not work for a period of time because my body has been through trauma, well, no one's paying me a maternity leave. Also, a lot of places aren't paying me a maternity leave, even if I am a full-time employee. So what can I do to set money aside? And instead of waiting until I am pregnant, and that is now 9 months away, or maybe sooner, I am going to start setting money aside years in advance into a maternity leave fund so that it's there if I need it. And then if it turns out that I don't need it, I repurpose that to something else. So I create hypothetical what if accounts. I'm a huge fan of what if accounts, but it's also just how my brain works. And if that sounds wildly stressful to you, don't do it. That's okay. And that to me is a huge through line of this discussion. What feels good to you, but also being a little self-reflective about why are you doing this thing? It might be what feels good to you, but is it good for you? And if it's not, what is triggering the behavior? Why are we doing the things that we're doing?
Yes, 100%. This feels therapeutic for me again, because I had to go through it's been like the most financial volatile year for me and emotionally volatile because of launching a book. And so I feel like I need to sort of climb my way back to those principles of like, okay, I have sort of been building my like basic like financial budget and then paying myself a certain amount and putting away for taxes, putting away for business savings, and kind of going on this sort of like routine. And now I'm in this moment of like, wait, do I like the way that I'm spending my money in my business? Do I like the way that I'm spending my money in my personal life? Are there things that I can comb from that to hone in better on like what matters to me now? And it's so volatile. I think like a lot of the times when I'm explaining what it's like to be a self-employed person to other people, they're like, I want to vomit for you. I want to be sick. And I'm like, I understand that there's a part of me that maybe is a little bit sick and is okay with this chaos. Like there's it's not for everybody. That's for sure. Like this discussion would probably make a lot of people nauseous because they're, at least including the way that I run my business, there is a good amount of like hope and a prayer. But this is also why runway is so important, right? Like I think without the business, like finance mentality of like, you need runway, whatever you need, like exactly what you said, whatever you need for your regular life, I'm like, divide that by 60%. And that's how much you actually should be earning so that you can put away for tax and things like that. Like you need to find that balance and make sure that your inner child, the one that just wanted to YOLO for the first 6 months of this year, doesn't run rampant. I think like what's so important for me is knowing that I am a creative person. I am a writer. I'm a video creator. I am an educator. And when I cannot I can't rein myself in terms of business principles, I need community. I need help. I need like financial advisors. I need my CPA to like hit me on the hand a little bit. I think that's sort of like a component that I think as writers, as self-employed people, we're like, I can do it. I'm the most self-disciplined person I know, or I can try to get there. Community is so important for me. For me, this year is all about like, Berna, get help, get out of your own mind and expand your team, basically.
Agreed. And also just talking about it with other people, you know, finding the folks who, and I would encourage anyone to find someone who is a close approximation to where you are in your journey. Also talk to the people who are much further ahead because they have so much advice and information to give. But sometimes that can be really demoralizing. So you're like, wow, I too wish I was making $1 million a year and it built this like monolith of a business. But unfortunately, that's not where I am right now. So finding the people that are also can be in your mastermind, that are closer to where you are, who can provide, you know, their own examples of support and maybe share a resource like, here's the CPA I use, or here's the financial advisor that I like, you know, all of that is incredibly helpful. Being part of the Authors Guild already, you're halfway there, but actually interacting with other people as well is important. But that in the whole community conversation, I think too often, particularly if we're self-employed and, you know, we can kind of be like a cowboy in the sense of, I can do it myself. I can't go back to the traditional workforce. This isn't for me anymore. It also might be for a season of your life. I know a lot of people who have gone in and out of being traditionally employed and then self-employed because it made sense for them at a time. There's also no failure in going back to a traditional job, particularly. Everything is a season. Like it doesn't mean you're doing this forever.
Yes.
All right. Last thing there were so many other wonderful questions that came in that I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to, but one that I do want to hit on right at the end here is how to be thrifty, frugal, also difference between frugal and cheap, just got to say it, but how to be thrifty and not feel deprived. So, you know, you've just talked about YOLOing a lot for the first half of the year. So second half of the year, Berna, how are we living within our means, but also living a luxurious life?
Thank you all. First of all, thank you, Erin, and thank you all so much for holding this space of what now has become financial therapy for me, because it's been a ride. But I'm hoping that folks are getting lessons out of this and some information out of this. So this is a very, very poignant question for me because now I'm like, okay, again, the discussion of seasons, of changes, of waves. I am now grappling with my own sort of scarcity mentality where there's a part of my head that's like panicking and it's like, oh my gosh, your 6 months runway has become, I don't know what it is, but it's chaos. And the other part of me that's like, listen to me. Your 6 months has become 5 months. You're fine. Like you look at it, look directly at it. Yes, you've got issues going on. So like, where do we then need to be thrifty? Where do we need to like pull in? This is where scarcity mentality starts to panic and is like, wait, thrifty means, oh my God, I'm failing. Thrifty means, oh my God, I got to figure this out myself. Thrifty means I should be ashamed. And that any means that I'm finding to like be more conservative or like pull things in is like a sense of failure on my part. And just like what you were just saying, for me to combat those feelings of shame and failure, like even just talking about it, I could already feel myself physically doing this and be like, oh God, oh God, oh God. And like, imagine me spiraling down into myself. What pulls me out of that spiral is exactly what you just said, talking about it. So what helps me feel thrifty and not deprived is sharing what's happening with myself with other like-minded folks. I am so blessed to have grown up with childhood BFFs who are absolute nerds like myself, frugalist people I know. And for us, I'm so happy that like our friendship has taught me that like being thrifty can be a practice and like a fun practice. Like for us and this group of friends, to get the best deal on something is like a competitive game. It's like a sport. When I do it by myself, I feel like I'm like a mouse, a peasant mouse, being like, we're gonna get the cheapest. But amongst friends, we're like, oh, I could find a better deal than that. Did you see this? Da 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 da. And so for me, the answer is community. If I'm doing it by myself, I feel deprived, I feel sad, I feel scared because it's just me and my scarcity mentality. Like, you know, it's like a toddler just doing this to me. When I'm doing it with my friends, when I'm doing it in community with like folks I've met through the financial space, I pose it as like a discussion. I pose it as a challenge. I pose it as a, this is what's happening to me. Who else is this happening with? And let's information share. Then thriftiness is like an activity. It's like a sport. And again, this is me talking to myself in the mirror for the next 6 months of just like, it's not that your budget's depriving you. It's forcing you to be creative. It's forcing you to reach out to community and like, and grab ideas. And then it feels like campy, feels like a game.
I love a challenge myself. And the only thing I will add, really, no matter where you live, I know this is kind of default advice for living in a city, but no matter where you live, there are fun, free to very cheap activities and resources. And I always like to make it a competition of like, what have I never done before that is a free or cheap thing that I could go do? Like in New York, one of my favorite is the New York Public Library has this wonderful tour for free that they only do, I think, twice a week. That is so interesting and so fun. Or take yourself on an artist date that is free to cheap. Go walk in the park and then sit and draw. Spend the $5 buying the delightful latte that you want, but then walk yourself to a museum during donation hours. Like bundling it with things that maybe give yourself a little allowance, like X amount that you get to spend on whatever you want in the month, but just kind of doing things, not because this is the cheapest possible option, but I'm maximizing how far I can make my money go and still do something that is delicious to me and whatever that word means to you.
Yes, 100. Okay, I know we're at time. Can I add one more thing that just like popped in my mind? And thank you to all the folks who have like stuck it out and are still with us. The one tiny thing I would add is, I talk about this a little bit in the first chapter of my book, but a lot of the time, the things that we're trying to like accomplish with our money have more to do with feelings than things. So for example, like one of the reasons I spend X amount on entertainment or whatever in the month is really just because like I want to kick it with my friends. And I want to feel surrounded and I want to be giggling and I want to like, it's important for me sometimes to identify what's the feeling I'm going for. And then can I get that feeling cheaper? I don't have to be in the club getting bottle service in order to feel like I'm having a sweaty, fun, good time with my friends. How can I get to that feeling by spending less money? And then that helps me be thrifty as well. Like identify like what it is you're actually trying to accomplish. Because a lot of the time it doesn't have to cost money.
Thank you so much, Berna. This was so wonderful. I feel like very therapeutic for the both of us. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. Johnny, if you have any last minute announcements, feel free.
Yeah, thanks to everyone. And I was just going to say that this fall, a lot of our educational programming is going to focus on book marketing. So stay tuned for all of that good stuff. I know that will really help a lot of people.
For y'all when I was, anyway, thank you for having us.
All right, we'll send everyone who registered a follow-up email with links for Erin and Berna so you can check out their stuff. Erin, Berna, thank you so much for doing this. It was a great talk.
Thanks, you, everyone. Thanks for having me.